memories of last year, and it was great to be amongst like-minded people who, yeah, are passionate about games and are Christians and are just thinking about the intersection of that. So we had a great time last year. So I'm glad it's happening again, even in this form. I think it's really important and glad to be here. We're doing fine. So Australia is pretty much more or less back to normal in terms of the pandemic. So some of our state borders are still closed, but other than that, life feels like it used to, which is good. So we've managed to keep our case numbers down. So life feels pretty normal, but like everywhere else for a lot of this year, it didn't. Lots of this year was spent just at home. However, for a freelance game designer, that's not that different to a normal year. So I didn't feel that my work patterns changed too much. So I also work at my church here. And of course, that felt very different not being able to meet in person, as I'm sure you're all still feeling the effects of in different ways. But yeah, life's more or less back to normal for us. We're very thankful for that, doing well. So yeah, my year didn't change that much. And in terms of game design work, a lot of publishers were still very active and keen to keep meeting with designers online. So even though I couldn't make it to any conventions around the world, which I would normally go to meet publishers, most of those relationships continued over Zoom and other things. So yeah, I feel that it's an industry that was largely, well, it got through COVID relatively well. And in some ways even had a boost from all the different ways people have been trying to connect and play games remotely, as you guys are. So that's kind of what the year's been like. Not that different, but then the most different year ever. So,
and what games since we last met in November have come out for you? I know that we've named two, and feel free to tell us about those. I'd like, I hadn't heard of Cloud City, so I'm interested even right now to find out what that's about.
Sure.
And then I also remember last year you had like a troll trivia thing that was hilarious, and I don't know whatever happened with that. So.
Sure. Well, so first, so Cloud City just came out through Blue Orange, who are a great publisher. And it's like a tile laying game with like a 3D element. So as you lay tiles on the table, you're building a city and you place 3D buildings on the tiles. And the basic premise is if you can get, Andy's gonna demo for us. Thank you. So if you get buildings in the same row or column of the same height, you can connect them with like a bridge. So it's all about making connections between 2 points, but at 3 different levels. So your bridges can kind of intersect over each other. So it's very much like a little spatial puzzle game. So one thing I was thinking a lot about last year was 3D elements in games, and this is one of the things that came out of that. So it's a pretty light family game, but with this kind of cool 3D puzzle element.
Was there a mechanic from a game that inspired that? Or I know you do a lot with polyomino pieces and 2D spaces, but is that just a pushing that, or did you play something that triggered that sort of like, hey, I want to take a spin off of something?
Yeah, well, after I did Baron Park, which is like a polyomino tile laying game, I naturally started, well, not naturally maybe, but I started thinking about turning that into a 3D thing. So I have like thousands of leftover cubes from Imhotep games. So these are like quite big wooden cubes. And I started gluing them together to make like 3D polyomino shapes. And that led to a bunch of different like prototypes. And one of them was, Cloud City, which was about, going up as you place tiles. And there's a similar thing in the Baron Park expansion where you're building monorails, which kind of is a level above your park. So they kind of came out of that same place of thinking. So in terms of Trivia Troll, I actually have prepared a little PowerPoint or
Oh,
Keynote, I
good.
should say, which goes through some of the stuff I've been working on this year.
Oh,
Would
very
people
good.
be interested if I just kind of went through that?
Oh, very much so. I need to give you control over something in order for you to do that?
Let me see if it'll let me share my screen. Yeah, I need participant
Um,
screen sharing.
co-host. There you go.
Okay. Okay, can you see that? It's just a big picture of
Yes.
silver and gold. Okay. So, I kind of think about, I did a lot of designing this year. I feel like I had more time to design because they're like, yeah, church was less busy and life was very different. So I had quite a lot of time to work on things. And so I kind of think about three different areas I was thinking about this year. And the first one was kind of a spin-off of this game that came out last year, Silver and Gold, which we'll be playing later. And this game is like what people would call a flip and write or roll and write game, where which is, yeah, you've been playing a lot of these, which is where everybody's marking down results from a die or a card flip on their own score sheet, or in this case, it's dry erase cards you're writing on. And I didn't kind of set out to make one of those, but a game I was working on ended up fitting really well in that kind of structure. So that's what Silver and Gold was. And it ended up being sort of more well received than I expected. And especially for like very casual gamers. So I kind of analyzed and thought about what is it about this genre and what is it about this game that connects with, yeah, really casual players. And a few things jumped out at me. One is there's a natural accessibility here because I think everyone knows what Yahtzee is. And everyone's just used to this idea of, a die is rolled and then we write stuff down. It just, for some reason, it just clicks very generally with all types of players. So that's one aspect I noticed. Another is just how quick these games usually are, because they usually allow for completely simultaneous play. So you don't have to ever wait for a turn. You're constantly writing stuff down. You're constantly progressing. There's lots of little moments of achievement along the way. So I think that's part of it. And then third, they're just naturally very casual, easygoing games because you're writing in your own space. So there's usually very little conflict, very little direct interaction. It's much more about just optimizing your own little play space. And I think those three things are like a really amazing little perfect storm for casual gamers being engaged. So I found that happened with Silver and Gold. And so I thought, I should dig a little deeper into this genre. So that's a lot of what I did this year, actually, is like think about sequels and spin-offs of this idea. Because I really wanted to keep thinking about how to engage the players who found this cool. So I'm going to show you a couple prototype images from like the unreleased, unofficial Silver and Gold sequel, which is at this stage called Treasures and Traps. And it's similar in that polyomino cards are flipped over and then you have to cross off spaces on these map cards. But the biggest difference here is instead of just filling in shapes, you're actually trying to draw a path through a temple, and you've got to avoid the skulls while picking up the treasures. So it's a bit more like a path building game. And it was pretty fun to design because I got to like come up with all these little mini maps of different temples and stuff. So it's kind of an Indiana Jones theme, slightly more complex than Silver and Gold, but in all my play tests, I had, lots of similar feedback, which is the simultaneous play, the super casual nature of it was still kind of connecting with folks. So that isn't signed yet, but I'm speaking, the publisher who has Silver and Gold is kind of still thinking about it, but hopefully that'll come out one day. And here's the scorecard for that game. And you can see there's a little more going on than some really simple roll and writes, but it's still pretty simple. You're just trying to avoid the bad stuff, collect the good stuff, make it through the temples, etc.
And Phil, do you do all those do you do those graphics yourself, or do you draw it up by hand and then have a graphic designer kind of mock it up?
So yeah, so I do my own graphic design for my prototypes. So like all of the icons and art, just Google Images I found. So that I don't actually illustrate or anything. But yeah, I picked up when I used to self-publish my games way back in the day before Kickstarter and all that. I sort of picked up graphic design a little bit. So Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop. So yeah, I still do my own prototypes that way. Yeah. So the other thing that was a bit of a spin-off of this idea is this game called Explorers, which I worked on this year, which was thinking about how do I take a kind of roll and write experience and just make it a bit bigger, a bit closer to a board game, a little longer, and with a bit more scope. So in this game, you're exploring a map, which is made up of 4 random tiles, which you slot into your game board. So these terrain tiles are kind of randomly slotted in to create a random map for each player. And finally got sick of polyomino shapes. So in this game, instead of putting shapes down, every turn a terrain card is flipped, and that tells you which terrain you can draw 3 X's on. And so you're kind of building a route, trying to pick up different items. And when you pick up items, you kind of circle them on the top of your board, and they score in different ways. But the main goal of the game is you're trying to pick up keys to then go and explore temples. The temples are these little kind of pyramid-shaped things. And there's a race element. So all the players are trying to get, you score the temples based on how quickly you get there compared to the other players. So first place gets 12 points, then 10, then 8, then 6, then 4. So this feels kind of like you're all on the same board because you're all racing to get to these temples, but you still have your own play space. So yeah, this game kind of takes a roll and write mechanism and just makes it a little more competitive, gives it more of a kind of adventure scope, I guess, but it's still a really simple, it kind of just feels like you're playing bingo still, which is kind of the appeal of all of these games. So that's Explorers. And so this was designed and signed during lockdown, and will come out next year, hopefully.
Can you say who the publisher is?
I probably
shouldn't,
just because it hasn't been
okay,
announced.
that's okay.
But yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, but certainly I'll let you know as soon as it's announced. Yeah, so that's one aspect of what I've been thinking about. And I think these games have also had a bit of a boost this year because a lot of them are quite playable remotely. So it sounds like you've been having lots of fun enjoying that today. Yeah. Shall I move on?
Sure.
To phase 2. Okay, so the other thing I've been thinking a lot about this past few years, but especially this year, is party games, like really social, party style, silly, fun social games. And a couple years ago, I gave myself the challenge of trying to design one, just as a challenge, I guess, because I enjoy playing them, and I thought I should give this a go. But with lockdown, I don't know about you, but I ended up playing a lot of Code Names and Just One on Zoom. So they're 2 like really fun little word games that play really well remotely. And so that, and also like the party games, the Jackbox party games, which are kind of, online versions of things basically like Boulder Dash and that style of party game. So yeah, I was thinking all about why these sorts of games are appealing. And I think it kind of made me shit. It's a different type of design for sure to what I normally do. And I think it's because instead of a mechanism, a central game mechanism being what kind of informs everything, with a party game, it's actually a type of social experience that informs everything. And the mechanisms of the game are kind of really just scaffolding to make that work. Um, so something like Just One or Code Names, really, I mean, the mechanisms are cool and important, but really the moments of revelation, the moments of cleverness, the laugh out loud, fails or wins, they're what really the game is all about. So I started thinking a bit about designing these a bit more intentionally. And one thing that I wanted to pick up on is trivia. So trivia games kind of have a bit of a bad name in terms of tabletop games because a lot of them are not very good. And we've all played games of Trivial Pursuit, which never end, or someone wins out of pure luck that they happen to know some random fact. And there's kind of this lack of it just really comes down to who happens to know certain stuff. So yeah, trivia games are a bit out of favor in the hobby space, but I kind of was thinking about what's fun about trivia and trying to turn that into a cool game. So I don't know if you have pub trivia that much. Do you have pub trivia in the States as a thing? Yeah, so it's really big here. So like huge. So it's very common for a group of friends to have like a weekly pub trivia night where they just go to the local pub and some wacky host comes out and they play trivia and win a lame prize. But I do it occasionally. And I think I did it at one point and I realized I was asking myself, what's fun about this? Why is this fun? Why do we do this? And I actually think my observation was anyway, that the reason it's fun is actually the talking in a group about what the answer might be. Like that's actually the heart of what's fun. Like winning, or like you hand in your score sheet and someone says, oh, you got 7 out of 10. And you go, okay, whatever. It's actually the moments of like, oh, who did have the #1 single in 1962? Could it have been the Beatles? What do you know about the Beatles? Like the actual discussion around the table, people arguing their case for what they think it is. It's actually cooperative. It almost feels like a co-op game because you're all discussing and working together trying to figure it out. So I wanted to come up with a game that was just all about that moment and much less about, getting it right and just raw trivia. So a couple of designs came out of that. One of them is called, well, the working title anyway, is Quiz Monster. And this is silly, a game with a silly theme, but it's basically a trivia game where you're working as a team and you're fighting the quiz monster who's trying to defeat you with trivia. So each round you have a trivia question, which is multiple choice. And as a team, you have to decide what answer you're going to lock in, but you also sort of have to decide how sure you are of that answer. So you have a 1, 2, 3, and 4 value kind of tile. And each round you have to submit an answer with the strength of that tile. So if you're really sure, you'll play the 4. If you're really unsure, you play the 1. If you're correct, you score that much damage on the monster. And if you're incorrect, you score that much damage on yourself. And if you get the monster to 40 damage, you win. And if he gets you to 20 damage, he wins. So it's a game of not only discussing what the answer is, but also how sure are we about this? But once you've used a tile, it's gone until you've used all the tiles, and then they all unflip and you can use them again. So you can also see ahead at what the next question's category is going to be. So you might say, oh, I'm pretty sure about this, but there's a geography question coming up next, so maybe we should save our big tile. And then there's also a few special tiles you can use to skip a question. And Oh, I finally figured out a way to get the 50-50 rule from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire into a trivia game. So these are what the cards look like. So you can see on the left side, there's the question card. On the back, there are only two answers. And at the very bottom, there's the correct answer. So if you play one of your 50-50 tiles, you're allowed to slide the card halfway out of the box to see what the two options are to show you, okay, it's definitely A or D, for example. But you have a limit of those 50-50 tokens to use. Anyway, this hasn't been signed or finished, really. It's still a work in progress, but I'm hoping.
And Phil, is that meant to be a cooperative game against the monster? So if you have a small group of people that you don't want to play Trivial Pursuit or against one another, you can play like Just One. You're playing against the machine itself.
Totally. Because the other thing about trivia games is no one wants to look like an idiot. And most trivia games make you look like a moron in front of your friends, and that's not that fun. But here, you're all making the decision together. You're all winning or losing together. So, yeah, definitely.
And by virtue of the having to use all of the point tiles, even if you knew all the answers, I guess you would go 16. You would have 16 rounds. 10-point per round. Yeah. So it's not meant to be a super long game.
No, that's right.
Because Trivial Pursuit's often long.
No, this will end. This will end, which is actually not mathematically definite for Trivial Pursuit. So, so I'm not sure what will become of this, but I want to keep testing it and see how it goes. The second party game was Trivia Troll, which I actually play tested at TOPCON last year with a few people around a table. And this is another way into that same social space of discussing what the answer to something might be. But here it's kind of mashed up with a secret identity game like Werewolf. So the way this
Among
works,
Us.
Or Among Us, yes. So the way this works is half of the table are secretly trolls, half of the table are secretly contestants. And the trolls, everyone closes their eyes. The trolls know who each other are, but the contestants don't know who the trolls are. And then a question card is put on the table, which is a multiple choice trivia question. So the example here is, which song spent more weeks at #1 in the US? And there's 3 options. But while their eyes were closed, the trolls all get to look at the answer on the back of the card. And then they put the card back down. So all the trolls know the answer. The contestants don't know the answer. And then you have 2 minutes of discussion where everyone's trying to convince the other players of what they think the answer is. So the trolls have to make a case, usually, for one of the wrong answers. And the contestants have to kind of sort out who's telling them the truth, who's bluffing, who's making it up. Sometimes the trolls can just let the contestants go off on the incorrect tangent in their discussion. But then if that happens too long, the contestant's like, hang on, no one's disagreeing here. And if no one's disagreeing, something's up. So at the end of the 2 minutes, everyone submits an answer secretly, A, B, or C. And then you reveal the answer, and you reveal who was who. And the contestants get 1 point each if they were correct. But they get a point per person who was correct, and the trolls get a point per person who was incorrect. So you have to convince as many people as you can to come onto your side, which is what generates the discussion. So this is another way into that exactly same space of how can I get a group of people to argue if, Hound Dog or Physical by Olivia Newton-John was the bigger hit. And that's what this game accomplishes.
Hey, and last year at TOPCON, you had a third role of a moderator, or I don't know what language you used. So that was kind of there to start the discussion. What happened to that role, and what was the process of eliminating that? Was it just too much?
No. So that is in the game. It's just not on this slide.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that was the public contestant. So basically, I realized that if no one knew who anyone was, sometimes discussion just wouldn't get started and people wouldn't want to talk. So one of the people on the contestant side is called the public contestant, and they reveal themselves at the start of the round. So instantly, you know, okay, here's one person we can trust. Here's one person who's trying to get the answer, and it just directed discussion. So yeah, no, that is still in the game. Yeah. Okay, the third party game is actually about it to come out. It's called Platypus, a nod to my native fauna, and this is coming out from Matago early next year. And this is very much my take on like a Codenames Just One style word game. I'll show you. Maybe I'll show you this slide. So this is all these images are in French, but yeah, you'll have to pretend it's in English. So in this game, this is another cooperative game, and there's 8 different words placed around the board, which are objects or people or just different things. So here we have Wonder Woman, Julius Caesar, the Loch Ness Monster, missing socks, you know, just all sorts of random things, kind of a little like what you might find in Codenames, just different objects and people and places. And again, you're kind of split into 2 teams, but you're working together. So one team is trying to find out the target word. The other team knows which of the 8 words is the target, and they're trying to direct the investigators to find it, but they can't speak. But what they can do is play adjective cards from their hand. So you have a hand of just all sorts of crazy adjectives. So big, small, funny, overrated, smelly, chubby, you know, whatever. And you play these cards to try and direct your teammates to the right answer. So let's say Wonder Woman was the target, and it's your turn. You have to play an adjective from your card, adjective from your hand, and then the people trying to find the word, all they can do each turn is flip over 1 or 2 of the 8 words to cancel them out. So in a sense, when I'm playing an adjective, I'm kind of telling you it's not this. And then you flip over 1 or 2 things. So what makes this kind of fun, I'm hoping, is that you're forced to make really bad descriptions of things with a limited vocabulary. So you only have a few adjectives in your hand, and you got to describe Wonder Woman. And it's like, well, she's not very old, but compared to Julius Caesar, she's young. So maybe I'll play young, you know, based on what you're comparing her to. Suddenly you've got all these different funny comparisons being made with this limited hand of adjectives. So yeah, that's been really fun to develop. And thankfully I got most of the playtesting done before lockdown, because it's very much a fun game to play in person, but should work. I reckon there's a way we can modify it for online play, but yeah. So this is my attempt at a game in that space.
And did you say that was picked up by, that's, when is that coming out?
So this is Matago. So it's coming out early next year, but I think at the moment they're just weighing up the right time
Gotcha.
to release it, because I think it's not the best time to put out a really social party.
Social, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know the exact date yet, but okay. Are people bored yet, or should I keep going?
Keep going.
I have one more category of game I've been considering.
Keep going.
And if you have any questions, feel free to just call out. So I've been thinking a bit more as I approach the dreaded 40th year. I have been thinking a bit about, you know, what does it all mean? You know, what's the point of designing games, really? You know, all that morose stuff. and just been thinking about what some sort of difference I can make through game design. And there's lots of positive things games can bring, and that's what TOPCON's all about. But just in really practical terms, I've been thinking about something really, just a positive change I could potentially make with games. And I've been thinking a bit about how games can affect culture and shape culture. And, we always think about how movies and books and music shape culture. But I actually wonder if games equally have a way of shaping cultural narrative and how people see their society. So, just as an example, if you think about probably the two of the most popular games in your country and here and many Western countries, Monopoly and Risk, one game about capitalism and driving people out of business and dominating them financially, and one game about teaching children how to be good at war. What if these two games are your key cultural texts? What does that do and these games have both been, have decades and decades of kind of being top sellers and games that almost everyone plays at least once growing up. So what does this do to, how does this shape a culture? I don't think we could ever fully quantify that, but I think it's an interesting question to ask. If these are your two cultural kind of touchstones that everyone has in their cupboard, how does that affect how we think about each other and interacting with other people? So this is, if I may be so bold, this is, two games in America that I think have shaped your culture. Two games that have shaped our culture here in Australia, which you've probably never heard of, are Squatter and Test Match. So these are probably two of the best known Australian made, produced and sold games. We don't have many of these. Our industry has pretty much just been importing American stuff. So our game departments in stores look very similar to yours. But these are two games that were kind of hits as like homegrown titles. So Squatter is from the 50s, I believe, maybe early 60s. And it's sort of a Monopoly knockoff. But anyway, it's all about being a sheep farmer in like outback Australia. And basically you kind of go around the board collecting sheep, and famine and fire and flood ruin everything you have. So it's a good depiction of kind of our harsh environment in a way.
And Phil and Murray Wilkinson he's in London, but he's a South African. Said it was big in South Africa as well.
No.
He got it when he was 9. So clearly, it's a Southern Hemisphere game.
I had no idea about that.
Not the sheep, the test match. Just
test match. Okay.
Oh, yes. Sorry, the test match. Well, that makes more sense. Sense.
Yeah, I can't imagine Squatter translating too well anywhere. And Test Match on the other side. So this is a game about cricket, which is one of the biggest sports here, and also in South Africa and India and England and other places. And this is actually a pretty fun dexterity game because it has like 3D players and like a pump action batsman and a little metal ball. You bowl down a ramp and then you got to hit it with your cricket bat. And, this is something a lot of Australian kids played growing up, and definitely plays into our love of sport and how, essentially, well, I think you can make a case that sport is our God in Australia. When COVID happened, all our Prime Minister wanted to talk about was how quickly we could get back to the football, get back to watching live sport again. That was like his shorthand way of saying everything will be good again when we can go back to the football. So Test Match, I think, kind of says something about our love of sport. Squatter, it says something about, our history and a particular time in our history when people, so the phrase squatter refers to in the early days of Australian settlement, a lot of when white settlement happened, Australia was essentially claimed as terra nullius and crown land. So our Indigenous peoples were completely ignored, then genocided, and no treaty was ever made with them. And squatter is about the practice of white settlers just taking huge tracts of crown land to make a sheep station on, which first began, I think, as kind of basically an illegal practice. But because Australia is so huge, it just kind of kept happening. And eventually it became not only legal, but kind of quite a looked up to almost profession to kind of just grab a chunk of land and start making money with wool. So the depressing thing about this game is it turns, essentially stealing land from Indigenous people into a fun, farming sim. And yeah, and I think that in a way it sums up our people's complete nonchalance and disinterest in the injustices that happened when white settlement happened here. So I look at these two titles and I am pretty depressed, really. So something I've been thinking a bit about this year is, could I work in this area and make a game that is truly Australian in its theme and flavor, but maybe says something more useful and more true about our history. And I got thinking about this because Meredith and I have become really good friends with an Indigenous woman who's a Christian leader here in Sydney, and she's also a gamer. And she started chatting to us about how great it would be if there was a game about Indigenous Australia that was in every classroom and in every house and just depicted Indigenous culture with dignity and with respect. And I just started thinking about that. So it's all in very early stages, but I'm working on a game which is about essentially the agriculture of Indigenous Australians. So you might not know our Aboriginal people are the longest other people group who have been in historically one place for the longest. So their history goes back 50 to 60,000 years in Australia, which, if you think about it, is pretty amazing. And for those tens of thousands of years, they developed agricultural practice that was completely in harmony with the land, so much so that when white settlers turned up, they didn't even recognize that there was agriculture happening because it was so integrated with natural ecology. And of course, within a few decades, it was all destroyed because they brought in sheep and horses and disease and ruined everything. So anyway, I've been thinking about like a set collection mechanism based around Australian Indigenous plants and animals. And Indigenous Australians had a fascinating method of trade and gathering together for ceremony to share things. And so I think this makes an obvious, it leads to an obvious kind of type of gameplay. So here's some of the just prototype cards I've been starting to put together. They also had really fascinating technology. Again, not always technology that a Western person would look at and go, aha, there's a fancy invention, but things which amazingly integrated with their world and their way of doing things really well. So here are some of the technology cards in the game, different ways of hunting and collecting food and then cooking it. I've been thinking about how these can, like, basically it's a set collection game with sort of growing technologies. So different powers you can build up and increase. The third element of the game I wanted to try and bring in is a sort of a respectful depiction of some of the different kind of people groups that made up Indigenous Australia. So down the bottom left there, you can see a really small map of all the different nations as best we understand before white settlement. And So there are many and diverse groups of people who we put them into one monolith of just Aboriginal Australians, but of course they each had their own language and culture. So here's a player board. This is for the Gubbi Gubbi Nation, who are like near Brisbane in Queensland currently. And so, yeah, each player would have a player board depicting one of these nations, and would be their deck of agricultural cards would be linked to what actually grew there, and their starting items would be linked to what they actually used. And this is just my way of trying to like foreground just the truth of certain aspects of their culture before white settlement. Anyway, so while I was working on this game, I kind of realized if I look at my shelves, I have games that depict ancient cultures all around the world in really kind of quite respectful, reverent ways, whether it be ancient Egypt or ancient Greece or ancient Babylon or the Romans. Like these are very common settings for games, and have taught me a lot about different times in history and different people. Yet, and I probably know more about them than my own ancient culture here in Australia. I mean, we are not taught. We are taught more about ancient Greece and Rome in schools here than our own people. So that I thought was really quite damning. That yeah, even when it comes to thousands of years ago, we're still really interested in just what the white dudes were doing. So this game, if I ever find a way to make it work, is an attempt to try and bring something into the conversation here that normalizes a respectful depiction of our past. So I'm not sure what will happen. It's obviously very fraught ground to design in, and yeah, the Indigenous leader I mentioned previously, I'll be partnering with her as kind of a consultant.
Bill,
yeah.
do you seek a different type of publisher for this sort of thing? Because this has got an educational component to it. I mean,
so that's still all up for grabs. So like, ironically, I think a European publisher would be more interested and more respectful of this content, just because which is a bit sad. So I'm not sure where it would land yet. However, we're definitely looking at some sort of self-publishing, because I think having complete control over the way everything's depicted is incredibly important. So it may be we look at a way to crowdfund it or self-publish it, and I'll be giving the proceeds, like the profits from this game, will go to land councils and different or an advocacy group here for Indigenous people. So it may end up being a self-published thing for that reason.
And so, would you say that, is this your first game that you have actually designed that had I'm really interested because it has a teaching or a formational component to it. You are shaping the way both, Indigenous Australians and otherwise think about their environment and the flora and the history. So would you say that is this content driven with mechanics driving the transmission of the content, or it could, if you replace it with information from another country, could it just be is the fun?
Sorry, you cut out there. I got most of the question.
Did that come through?
I got most of it, but it cut out a bit at the end. Sorry.
I guess I just wondered what was driving the game. I was wondering, do you whatever the people who play it, or is it more, this is a fun game in and of itself, and if you swapped out the theme for something else, it would still be a fun game in and of itself?
Yeah. So definitely. So my goal is to make a really good game. So it's not, the first thing is I want this to be a really enjoyable experience. So I'm not going to phone in the game design to or compromise it just to like get in certain content. So I think that's one thing about quote unquote educational games is if you want to use games as a tool, that's fine, but they still have to be a good game. Like you can't, you're not going to communicate anything very well if the game isn't fun. So that's the first thing. That this is going to be a game that would be good enough. The mechanisms should stand on on their own as fun and enjoyable. However, you're right. Unlike my other games, in this case, I'm actually starting out with I want to communicate an idea and even form culture. Yeah. So definitely I've been researching and reading and trying to make the mechanisms map onto some depiction of how agriculture and trading worked then. So I don't think it could be just rethemed. I think it definitely, I want it to feel like a strong depiction of what it's trying to depict, and have mechanisms that really reflect that, so that as you play, you kind of develop you have some sort of empathetic experience, and you're just like, oh, wow, what an interesting, like you do when you play any game about ancient Egypt, you go, wow, what an interesting group of people who did amazing things. That's really the experience I want you to have. So it's kind of new ground for me in that way, that the theme is integral to all the mechanisms I develop. Normally I'm a bit more of a mechanisms first designer, but in this case, I actually started by reading a book about history. That's how I began. And then or talking to Indigenous people and finding out about how they used to trade. That's kind of how it's begun. I guess I don't think of it so much as an educational game, so much as just a depicting of something that I hope will influence culture. Murray, did you put up your hand?
I did. Is that all right? I don't want to gate crash just yet.
No.
It's just I'm absolutely loving this kind of idea. I'm in the middle of shifting from kind of ministry and theology into education, training to be a science teacher, and I've been fascinated by the intersection of play and learning, which isn't that easy a place to fill. But especially with something like this, where it's not just the transmission of knowledge per se, in terms of here's a bunch of facts you might remember, but actually about a formative something deeper about culture. And in terms of the world of science, that's very needed, like how to make somebody think differently. So I'm just are there known gaming mechanisms that kind of go into that space, or is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah, so I think that's, to me, finding games that actually model that, or basically you learn something as you play, rather than the game is a tool for transmission of fact. I think that's a great way to kind of sum up how I would view a good educational game. So what mechanisms can you find that actually allow the players to enact the learning you're trying to make them do? So to me, a science game that is essentially Snap but with science facts is that might be fun, it might work for certain things, but surely a more engaging thing would be a game which allows the players to engage in the scientific method themselves on some level as they play the game. Like, is there a way to model a scientific experiment in a game? That would be cool. Games can embody different experiences, and so it seems a shame to me to waste what games do best. There, just on that, there's a really interesting publisher called Genius Games. I don't know if you've heard of them, but all of their games are science themed. But I haven't played any, but I've been following and reading their reviews and stuff because I'm quite interested in what they're doing. And apparently, they're really threading the needle there of science themed games that are actually thematically really engaging and stuff. So
Cool.
have a look for them if you haven't already. Well, I'm pretty much done talking, but I'm very happy if anyone has any questions about any of this. I'm happy to keep chatting.
Any questions from anyone? Well, thanks for sharing with us, Phil. Those are phenomenal. Did you say that did the trivia troll?
Yep,
is that picked up?
It did get picked up this year, and it will be out July.
Okay.
It'll probably have a different name.
And I said the one thing that it'll what?
It'll probably have a different name.
Oh, I like that name. Yeah, that's too bad. It's a good name. Well, thanks, Phil. That was great. We're gonna take a 5-minute break for folks just to run to the bathroom. And then we will I'll start explaining silver and gold to you. I could probably just have Phil do it, but I did adapt it to the one sheet, so I don't know. We'll see. Phil, I'm interested to see what you think of the one page.
I'm looking forward to it.
So let's take a 5-minute break for those of you if you're not game, but there's some people who need to go to the bathroom. Start in 5 minutes. So is she gonna camera me out? Huh?
Oh, what happened?
I just seen if we're still connected.
If I just went boop and pressed it.
I should restart.